Hey everyone, welcome to the Not a Lonely Coffee Break podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Meaghan, and we're a podcast about coffee and work, but make it queer.
So speaking of queer,
Mhm.
Did you see that the Olympics broke a record by having 193 openly queer athletes competing?
That's
And then
awesome.
I think I saw that like a third of them won medals,
Oh,
which is like the first. So they
yeah.
broke a record by being the year of the most.
Well, that's great. It's like one of those events that everyone knows about. Some of us may not follow it all the time, like all the world champions
Mm-hmm.
and stuff, but when it comes on, we're pretty interested.
Like interested in sports that like we have never been interested in before. We're like rooting, cheering. So Meaghan, I'm curious, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns. Well, she, her. Maddie, what are yours?
I also use she, her
Okay. Same.
pronouns. I guess what do your pronouns mean to you? Like, have you ever really thought about it?
When we started talking about this, segment and like to really dive deep. I'm gonna try not to go full blown like here's my soul. But I will have to say that growing up for me, like women in I don't even want to say this wrong, but in my specific experience, women have not always been the stronger like person, right? The in society, it's the secondary. It's very patriarchal, right? I grew up in a very patriarchal life. So actually growing up for me was really interesting because I was wearing a lot of more like tomboyish clothing and like really wore just like jorts. I wore the jorts and the polos and the pants and the like polos. I wore a lot of polos and because I was just like there's this strength thing. And so I really had mixed feelings about my identity for a little while and like what that meant like because I was like do I even want to be a woman if I'm going to be second in everything. And then as I became older I like got more um attuned to feminism and like what it really meant and like women are actually pretty fucking awesome and it's okay to be who
No.
I am and not be like I like to fit this thing of strength or whatever. It was a whole thing. Like I really felt like I am proud to be who I am as a woman and I'm good and that's just who I am. So
Mhm.
that's what it meant to me. And it's really interesting because it's like, you know, we grew up trying to figure out what she, her, and him and his and like all these pronouns and being grammatically correct and things like that, but it really does have meaning in our life, like as far as like who we identify as and but she her just kind of like it came naturally to me after a little while because I started being okay with who I was.
No, yeah, no, I love that. I think that I was actually thinking, I think for me too, that's kind of started to be sort of like I feel more powerful sort of
Hmm.
in the with the she her pronouns, but it's also something that I feel like at least recently as I've gotten to interact with other people who use different pronouns, I feel like I've also come to acknowledge my own privilege around the
Hmm.
fact that I use the pronouns that you would think that I use. And it's one of those things that I'm even having to make sure I'm intentional in trying to respect people's pronouns and ask
Right.
them about their pronouns and get to know them as a person.
Right.
Um and I don't know, sometimes it's I find it to be, especially as it's something that maybe is a little bit newer for me.
Hmm.
Not that I wasn't respectful of people before, it's sort of a newer thing for me to be intentional about asking people what their pronouns are. I find it so sometimes to feel a little awkward
Hmm.
because I don't know like the right way to ask it or bring it up or
Yeah, and it's become more important because I think people are becoming more attuned to who they are and their identity and why it's important. in their life. Whereas before, it's always been like this very, you fit into this pile and you fit into this pile, and that's just the
Right.
way it needs to be, regardless of even your sexual identity, right? Like you fit, like that's why the trans community, I feel, in my opinion, the trans community has, like, because they don't always fit into certain piles, right? The he and she piles. So it's just, it is difficult. It's like you have to rewire, and you do have to be intentional, right? So if you're an ally listening, like if you ever find yourself like, I don't understand why this is so difficult, it's okay. Like that's completely normal. It's the intention behind it that matters.
And I think it's understanding and respecting pronouns. It's not just about language. It's about sort of acknowledging, recognizing, affirming people's identities
Hmm.
and their lives and what that might look like even in the professional setting that you might be engaging with or living as someone who uses different pronouns.
Right.
Um, so did and I didn't go down a huge rabbit hole, but I did
Hmm.
find at least an interesting thing in the research.
Okay.
Because I was kind of curious about pronoun use in the workplace.
Yeah.
Um, it said so. Research shows that when trans and non-binary people are addressed with correct pronouns, they experience lower levels of anxiety, depression, and dysphoria. And so, like, we had an episode devoted on mental health.
Right.
So, this is even a simple way that we can also support mental health while also being an inclusive workspace.
Hmm.
And so that just really resonated with me because
Yeah. And by the
all you have to
way,
do is respect people.
yeah, respect people, respect their pronouns. What comes out of that is productivity, right? If you have employees and team members who feel like they don't have to be anxious because they're afraid that they're going to be misgendered or mispronounced or singled out, they can actually just focus on their work and get what you need them to get done. So instead of causing more trouble, let's just be more productive, you know?
Mm-hmm.
No.
So I thought to help us continue this conversation, thought it would be cool for us to bring on a guest.
Ooh.
So I reached out to this really cool person that I
Okay.
know, Chelsea, said they would be willing to come and sort of share their experience with
All
pronouns,
right.
navigating the
Okay.
workplace. And so Chelsea is going to join us.
What?
And yeah, y'all are going to love Chelsea. They are just so wonderful. So everyone, please join us in welcoming Chelsea. Chelsea, welcome. I'm so excited to have you joining us for our coffee break today.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what your pronouns are?
I'm Chelsea Tomek. Who am I? What a big question. Who am I? Use they them pronouns. I feel like being at the resource center and around other volunteers who use they them pronouns was like my first exposure to like consistently being around people who use they them pronouns or sometimes use they them, have the slash she slash they like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I got some practice there, which was kind of nice because the majority of volunteers were using they, them, and a lot of the like youth were using they some of the time, and so it was like I'm just gonna
Yeah.
default to they for everybody, and then if I mispronoun them in the neutral way, it's better than like
Mm-hmm.
misgendering them or mispronouncing them, whatever, in
Mm-hmm.
the in the opposite and the cisgender way.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I definitely agree. I think that they've done a great job at creating a safe space for
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging when you make that mistake, but not holding it against you for the rest of your life because you
Yeah,
you maybe used the wrong pronoun one time.
yeah. Use it changes like
It
frequently because they're just
does.
like trying on how
Yeah.
things feel, and sometimes you kind of have to like try it on before you realize like yes this fits or no this doesn't fit. Name tags were a lifesaver, but also just defaulting to they them.
Mm-hmm.
Almost nobody was offended if you used they them, but they didn't use those pronouns there.
Pronouns is something that a lot of people in society, they hear us say the word pronoun and they have feelings about it, even though pronouns are something that we have learned in school for many moons, many years. It's not a new concept, but I do think that there's a lot of strong reaction. So I'm curious, what do pronouns mean to you?
I mean, in terms of people using, like, if someone like me goes through the trouble of informing another person that, like, I have different pronouns than I may appear to, although I do get sirred not infrequently, which I think is funny.
I too get sirred a lot.
Like the hair, I feel like from behind people will be like, sir, and then I'll be like, and they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like, I'm like, I mean, it's not. It makes sense that you thought it was a boy from behind, but I just feel like it's an easy way to like show respect for somebody, like using the right pronouns. If it means enough to me that I'm gonna be like, can you use these one syllable words around me when referring to me? I guess not even when you're not around me, like using the correct pronouns is important too. It's good practice, but especially around me, it's just like a way to tell me that you like see me and respect me and as I am, you know.
So if you aren't comfortable sharing, that's totally fine, because I don't use they them pronouns. I use she her. And I am curious, what helped you realize that you identified more as they them versus she they or she her or whatever it was?
Oh God, that's like the eternal question. Like increasingly over the years, like I don't know, woman and girl, and she just started to like feel bad. I don't know how to like explain it. Like wearing a pair of pants that like used to fit and then they're too tight now, and you're like, well, dang it, gotta get some new pants. Where it's just sort of like low key uncomfortable all the time, and you're like, okay, I need to like think about what this means. I think I grew up with like a pretty, I don't know, like I feel like my mom was an engineer, was like not a stereotypical like feminine woman, and so I grew up being very comfortable with being like a tomboy kind of, like not super into makeup and dressing up or
Shout
clothes or
out to
whatever.
tomboys.
Yeah, and I feel like there's like overlap sort of between, because like my mom and I've had this conversation when I'm explaining they them, like what it means to be they them and like how it's different from just like being a tomboy. Like I think there's like overlap into like leaning into masculine, like stereotypically masculine things, but also like I think just the language itself started to feel uncomfortable. But also for a while I didn't really like they them either, because it sort of feels like robotic and like not human to me, like, or it did for a while. Now I'm like more used to it. I think I just wasn't used to it. It kind of sounded like using like it pronouns where it's just sort of like too neutral. I'm like, I want to like feel like a human, you know.
Right.
But so I think part of using she they was just like trying on the they, like seeing how it felt, and it felt really good. I was like, okay, maybe like this does feel like something that I can use to describe myself, because I don't really feel like I wouldn't describe myself as trans, although like being non-gender conforming does fall under the like trans umbrella. Like I feel like non-binary feels more accurate, where it's just like I'm in the gray, like in between, like there are no rules. I can do like there's no stereotypes.
I can totally see, like, if I were to draw the spectrum and use like people, I can totally see you in the middle going like this.
Just like one of those like air signs outside of like a car dealership. Gender is fluid.
I love that.
Actually, speaking of fluid, there was one night at Youth First, which is the like teenager support group, not support group, like hangout. I went to like an art night, and they were like, create a collage of your gender out of like magazines. And I'm a volunteer, but I did it too. Everything I picked was like a fluid. I picked like clouds and water and like it was very naturey, and I was like, maybe like gender fluid would be actually a more accurate
that would be
thing.
that's really
Because
cool.
like I can feel like more feminine or more masculine,
Mm-hmm.
but not really like fall solidly in one box or whatever. And not to say she, her, he, him. And I thought that was like really interesting.
It helps me understand more just about sort of what your pronouns mean to you, because I know other people might have a completely different meaning for them. For me, I use the pronouns that I was born with. Like I came out and they said it's a she. And so for me, I've never not felt like a she, and so it's hard for me to sometimes understand that part of it. Not that I'm against it, I just don't understand it. And so I love hearing people sort of explain their experience with it, because I think it just gives me more just more honestly like comfortability and even using those pronouns, because now I feel like, oh, I know this huge piece of Chelsea's life. I understand what those pronouns mean to them.
Yeah.
And so I might like get stuck in my brain now. I don't know.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. I feel like I like err on the side of not explaining my experience of gender, because it feels like I don't want to go so far as like justifying. Like there's a line somewhere between like sharing my experience and like justifying my experience, you know? And I feel like I like try to avoid justifying, but it does feel like kind of cathartic to explain it and to know that it like helps make sense of it, like from the other side of things. I hadn't really thought about that.
I just think of it
the story.
I just try to think of it as like, this is part of who you are. And like I want to know who you are, and I want to know your experiences because it's different than mine, right? And I don't want to make an assumption. And so hearing that part of your story just allows me, I think, to connect with you even more as a friend, because I'm like, wow, I now understand Chelsea's pronouns better than I did before.
Yeah, that's well said. I appreciate that. Like,
right. And I feel like it's too, part of it could also be to how what it means to that single person, right? And like you guys are saying, it's just a sign of respect, and so just honoring that person's wishes of just letting them be who they who they want to be is part of it, right? So I'm sure it could have like several different layers, and as long as you're respecting that person too, right? So you know, it's like, it's just funny because in research, because everything is starting to get researched more and like starting to be wrote about in journalism more. It's like, okay, what is the correct language too? Because I think even with race, when in ethnicity, when we're talking about Mexican versus Hispanic versus Latino, is like all these different types of like responses to what do we say now? But yeah, I think as long as, I hope that as long as I respect that person, it just comes across as that.
Yeah. I feel like in the majority of times, like if people do use she, her, or he, him with me, like I can tell that they don't mean it in a disrespectful way, so it like genuinely doesn't bother me, because I like, we have like 30 whatever years of training of like seeing a person, identifying if they look more feminine or masculine, and then using the according pronouns, like
our brain has a default, and it's hard to switch that sometimes when you have memories of your elementary school teacher, like with their little pointer stick pointing to the different pronouns and holding up pictures.
Right.
Yeah, those flashcards just never go away.
Yeah. I like wonder about that with languages where it's like so gendered. Like, grateful to speak English because there's like a little bit more nuance, but maybe Spanish is starting to kind of develop that like
oh my gosh, Chelsea,
too. I hope so.
This is why we're such good friends. I literally was thinking about that today.
Oh yeah.
Like, I wonder if like people using pronouns is as big of a deal in other cultures and languages. And like, I am familiar with Spanish, and yeah, it's very gendered, but it's like singular and then plural.
Mhm.
Right.
So I don't know if that is very curious.
Yeah. And if any of your listeners come from, anywhere other than America,
Yeah, America.
we'd like to know. Give us some
Yeah,
insight.
please.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Even with some of the they, them pronouns I've seen, like she, they, or he, they as well. So it's like so much context within that identity that, I really would like to dive deep and see what, just the rainbow of all those different types of, identities and what that means to those people.
I did. I like to describe using, for me, this is not a blanket statement for everybody who
Right.
uses she/they, but for me, using it was I'm non-confrontational and I prefer they, but if you use she, that's cool too. I'm like not
Right.
mad about it. And that's still like how I feel like emotionally now that I'm like going with they, them. Like if people use she, I'm like, I understand. I'm non-confrontational, but I'm trying out like using they. It was like putting a foot into the pool.
Right.
Be like, we're just gonna test it out, see how people react. Oh, nobody cares. Okay, great.
Mhm.
We're gonna dive all the way into the they
No,
them.
I was talking with someone not that long ago actually who uses she they pronouns, and it was one of those things like I knew those were the pronouns they used, and so I feel like I always just defaulted to she if ever I was referring to them or talking about them. I would just default to she, and I'd be like, well, their pronouns are she they. But then they shared with me that they preferred they pronouns, just like what you said, Chelsea, but that they felt like maybe they had kept the she more for like the professional if they were like out in more of like out meeting, networking with people, and the she was maybe a more comfortable pronoun. But then they said, they were like, but I prefer they pronouns. And I was like, I never thought about it. Like, how many people sort of keep the default pronoun as more of just a comfort for other people?
Right.
Yeah, for
Or
sure.
because they're worried about that professional setting that they're in and how the they or them or another pronoun. We just know that they and them tends to be a little bit more common
Right.
than some of the other pronouns that are out there.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, especially like for those who are trying to, who may be in a career field where it's like you have clients and like there's all these big things that are like depending on you having a relationship with this person or with this client, that you're like, I just don't want that to be the hill I die on.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's like a lot of work to tell people what they can't see. I mean, I look more androgynous so they can like maybe guess, but like not everybody who uses they them appears androgynous. So it's like something you have to like
Right.
communicate. And if you're in a setting where you're like meeting a lot of new people, it's more like, at least for me, I'm like, I don't care enough to be like they them, they them, they them. But one thing I was gonna say when you suggested that we put our pronouns on our little videos was like that's something that's
Mm-hmm.
been like super helpful for me at work because like having a visual there where it's like I don't have to like
Yeah.
verbally remind or like
right.
interrupt the flow of a conversation to be like actually then like
Right.
I don't know, it just feels like
No,
a load
I
from my
like it.
plate, and yeah, it's just a lot.
I like it too. I think it gives people a quiet way
Yeah.
to tell people who they are, and I think it also can remove some of that confrontation that a lot of people might feel about, do I need to like hold a conference where I reintroduce myself with my pronouns or whatever.
Yep.
Um,
I
yeah,
like it.
no, let's just go on a Zoom call and have everyone put their pronouns.
I have enough.
Which, so, I mean, even that though, like just asking people to put their pronouns can sometimes prompt confrontation. And they're like,
Yeah.
can't you see?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I can't see your pronouns. Please tell me what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't I think I just like surround myself with like people who aren't confrontational, and I grew up in a family that's like very non-confrontational, for better or for worse. So like
Right.
if people have issues with things, like I'm not going to hear about it directly, I might hear about it indirectly, but like the most helpful thing, especially with family, is like if like my siblings are probably the best about using they them, and it's like the hardest for people who've known me my whole life to shift, right? So like I give them
Right.
like more grace than like people who I've only known for a few months, you know? So I give my family grace and stuff, but it's like super helpful when other people use they them pronouns in front of them, because I feel like
Right.
it like tweaks something in their brain. They're like, oh, this is like real. And
Right.
then
Right.
like this is something I need to like respect, even if I have feelings
Mm.
about it or whatever.
Touching that.
So I know that
Yeah.
you made a
Ooh.
switch in workplaces. What were some things that I guess you, because when we look for workplaces, we want to go places where we're going to feel comfortable, safe,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, we're also in Texas, so
Mhm.
sometimes that's a little bit harder to find. So what were some things that maybe you looked for that told you like this place is going to be inclusive and supportive of my identity, respectful of who I am?
So it's like policy at my work to have pronouns in your signature,
Right.
and some people just like haven't updated it, but most people have, and so I feel like that's just like a low key like indicator that it's okay
Mm-hmm.
to not have the expected pronouns, have surprise pronouns.
Mhm.
I had like a Zoom interview, and they had their pronouns on their little names, like
Okay.
on the call, and
Mm-hmm.
that's like a super easy way to just show like that you're
Mm-hmm.
a safe space for people to be like, hey, I use different pronouns, and just like a casual way that you can like
Mhm.
encourage everybody to just put their pronouns in, so it's not weird for the one person who may have to use different pronouns.
Right.
Like I don't think we talked about anything like gendery during
Mm-hmm.
the interview, but
Which is how it should be,
yeah, exactly.
Right.
right?
Exactly.
It's
I
like
That's
didn't have
how
to
it
like
that's
explain anything.
right. Like that by itself is a green flag
Yeah,
mhm.
that's true.
because, they could have been on the reverse. You said, "Hey, I'm Chelsea. I use they them pronouns," and they could have been like, "What?
Yeah.
We don't
Or
believe
just
in pronouns here."
Yeah,
or just focus the entire interview on the pronouns instead of like your
ooh,
actual skills and like
that's
your
true.
work history and stuff, you know?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine, yeah.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's true. The place
Mhm.
I work is like a green flag fest, so I just I just like love it. It's a really great place to work, and I'm like so used to it
That's
that I'm like I don't
awesome.
even think about
Okay,
the things that
stop.
they do.
Aren't they also like? Isn't it also something about like sustainable, like
Yeah.
sustainability? So not only is it a green flag fest, but they're doing it while being green.
While being green.
Yes.
Okay.
Love it. Yep. Yep. So many meanings.
I
Wow.
love that. No, I
Mm,
think you bring up the good one that I know a lot of people look for is the emails, right? When you're emailing back
yeah.
and forth, do you have pronouns in your email? If you do, that usually is a sign that at least there's a pocket of support at the
Some
organization.
sort of allyship.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
some sort
exactly.
of allyship, even just to the queer community in general, even if it's not necessarily that you use different pronouns, just that's sort of a way to signal to the queer community. We here, we allies.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, it's interesting too, like I feel like within the queer community there's like older LGBT folks who aren't as used to like gender queerness.
Oh,
And I've run
okay.
into that a little bit at work, which has been kind of interesting because it's like an extremely queer friendly. Like, there's a lot of queer people that work at my work, but I'm the only they them, and so I feel like it's like on the one hand, it's a very safe space to be queer and like talk about like my she her partner, but on the other hand,
Mm-hmm.
I can like be
Oh,
accidentally misgendered because folks just like aren't comfortable with like the gender side of
right.
queerness, which
Yeah.
is like it's all a journey, right? And things are
Mm-hmm.
changing and evolving quickly. So, but that's been kind of interesting.
Oh,
But there's always more to learn. I feel like and it's like constantly evolving.
right.
I feel like the effort makes more of a difference than like using the perfect pronouns every time. Like the
Mm-hmm.
intention is evident, And so like if you're trying and you mess up, and it's okay. Like I feel like
Right.
when I witness somebody else's face after they use she her and they're like, oh god, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's okay. Like we can just keep on chit chatting. It's fine.
I
It
do have
doesn't
to
be a
admit, I've
thing.
made that face a couple times. I'm like,
I know, me
sorry.
too. Well, yeah, and I've been on the other side of it, too. Like, and I like you don't want to like no one wants to feel like they're inadvertently disrespecting somebody. But I don't think that's like really. I guess I don't take it that way 99% of the time. So I would say like if you misgender someone, just like correct yourself
Right.
and
Right.
keep on moving with the conversation. I've had coworkers a couple of times like we'll use she her in a meeting and then like an hour or two later I'll get like a message and they'll be like, "Oh my god, I used the wrong pronouns. I'm so sorry." I'm like, "It's okay."
It really does show that they're trying at that point because they're
Yeah.
willing to like acknowledge, hey, I messed up, even
Yeah.
though it's like I already knew you messed up and we
Right.
were just gonna keep
Yeah.
going, like we weren't gonna, but they're like, no, I'm gonna own the fact that I messed up and let you know that I'm gonna do my best not to mess up again, but I probably will.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I
Just
think it takes a big person, I think, to do that.
yeah, it's like good communication and just like a level of like I'm okay with trying and failing and trying again. I feel
Right.
like failing is a strong word, but like, try and using the wrong word and then try again and it's fine.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us and sharing a little bit about your experience and answering some of our questions.
Sure, it was fun talking to y'all.
What are you a coffee drinker and what is your go-to coffee beverage of choice?
Yes, I'm a coffee drinker. Lately I've been drinking cold brew blended with frozen bananas and like cocoa. So it's like chocolatey, cocoa-y, frozen goodness because it's very hot out. But I also make like a pour over at home and it's very strong and it's delicious.
Thanks again, Chelsea. You're awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for
So fun.
hanging out with us longer than you might have expected.
Whoops.
Of course, of course. All right, good to see y'all.
That was a great chat. Grateful. I'm so grateful that Chelsea was willing to like be open and sharing their experience and everything. But I'm out of coffee.
And I'm done.
That is our cue to wrap up. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. We would love to hear from you guys on social media. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Patreon.
What do we have on Patreon?
Patreon, you will also be able to access, of course, our exciting official Coffee Break Crew package for just $5 a month.
That's nothing. Cheaper
in
than a cup
that
of coffee.
Package, I know, it really is. In that package, you will be able to access exclusive content, maybe additional footage from episodes that didn't make the final cut, but is still awesome. You also will get premiere access to our merch. We have been working on getting some awesome merch packages. We hope that you will continue joining us every other Wednesday at 11 a.m. or whenever you get a chance to listen to us, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify. And of course, make sure you subscribe to Not a Lonely Coffee Break. We're your hosts. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Meaghan.
And we hope to see you next time.
Yeah. Cheers, queers.
Cheers, queer.